All right, everyone, it's 7 o'clock. So we are going to get started with our event for this evening. My name is Shelley Popke, and I'm the Executive Director of the Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum. And I would like to welcome you all to our first lecture in a series of lectures by Duane Vandenbusche about the history of the Gunnison Country. The lectures are going to take place every Thursday, and the series is free, though we would like to welcome you to make donations to a scholarship fund that we are establishing for an educational scholarship for a student. You can make donations on the website. I'll put the link in the chat. And also on our website, which is crestedbuttemuseum.com, you can support the museum by buying raffle tickets for our black and white ball. We have some fantastic prizes, and our raffle tickets are on sale through the end of the month. The winners will be announced on July 31st. So please check out our website, crestedbuttemuseum.com. Duane will present his lecture, and then please put any questions that you have in the chat, and I will read those after we finish the lecture. And please join me in welcoming Duane Vandenbusche.
Shelley, thank you very much, and welcome to everybody on Zoom. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not a real technological guy, so this is a miracle in itself with me on Zoom. I want to especially welcome three people, and I see we've got them from all over the nation, which is fantastic. Elva Dreyer, one of my great athletes, the greatest woman athlete I ever had, is in from Texas. Mike Burns, Charlottesville, Virginia, one of the early heads of the ski patrol at Crested Butte in the early 60s, and Liz Campbell, my good friend who works at the Colorado Ski Museum at Vail. What I'm going to do is talk about Crested Butte as my first topic today, and then next week we're going to talk about the Black Canyon and some of the great adventures that occurred in the Black Canyon. But today it's Crested Butte, 8,885 feet high, Mount Whetstone, Mount Axtell, Mount Emmons kind of guarding the town. 6 14,000-foot mountains between Crested Butte and Aspen, the Elk Mountains, one of the most beautiful spots in the world. The Ute Indians were the original residents of the area around Crested Butte and the East River Valley. And they were moved out of the Gunnison Country after having been here since about 1600. They were moved out when the miners began to come in and the ranchers began to come in the 1870s. In 1875, they were moved out of the Gunnison Country from the Los Pinos Indian Reservation, and they were put on a new reservation site 12 miles south of today's Montrose at a place called Kelowna. 6 years later, they were moved completely out of Colorado, except the southern Utes, which stayed down around Mancos and Cortez and Ignacio. Placer miners were the first white people who came into this area to stay for a while. They came in the 1860s. Now, these are individual gold panners, and the days of the individual miner was now upon us. And what they did was, as they panned out Coal Creek, the Slate River, the East River, all of the streams of the area around Crested Butte, an individual miner with a gold pan would scoop a little debris out of the bottom of a stream bed, and then with water in it, gently rotate it downhill. And all the light stuff flowed off. And what was left in the bottom of the gold pan were rocks or pebbles, and if you were lucky, black sand, which was gold. And then you would take forceps to take the rocks and the pebbles out. And then you'd pour a little mercury in the bottom of that gold pan, and that would amalgamate or link up with gold. And then when you burned the mercury off, what was left in the bottom of the gold pan was always referred to as pay dirt. The gold on the bottom of the pan that paid. Free gold, shot, wire, grain, flour, dust, and nugget. Needed no smelting, put it in your saddlebags, and ride away. One of the great camps that was in operation in 1861 was one at the head of Washington Gulch, 7 miles from Crested Butte, and that was called Minersville. 250 placer miners talked about by Reverend John Franklin Dyer, who visited it in 1861. In 1874, the great surveyor Ferdinand Vandenbusche Hayden came to the Crested Butte area. And standing on top of Mount Teocalli at 13,200 feet, he looked off in the distance and he saw two mountains, and he named them the Crested Buttes. A little later on, they thought that one of them more resembled a Gothic cathedral, hence the name Gothic Mountain. And then they dropped the S from Crested Buttes because they thought the other mountain resembled the edge of a Spanish helmet, the crest of a Spanish helmet. So hence the name Crested Butte Mountain. In 1875, two brothers named Jennings came into the area, and they were the first ones to discover coal deposits along Coal Creek. This was in 1875. 3 years later, they sold their coal land to Howard Smith, who is the real father of Crested Butte, and another fellow by the name of Sant Robinson. And those two guys began the first development of the huge coal deposits around Crested Butte. However, Crested Butte was not known early as a coal town. It was rather known as the gateway to the Elk Mountains. It was the supply town, the railroad town, the smelter town for all the great silver camps which opened up in the late 1870s nearby. Gothic, Schofield, Irwin, Tin Cup, Elko, Crystal, and Pittsburgh. In the year 1880, one of the great camps, Irwin and Crested Butte, were joined together by the Pioneer Wagon Road, which was built 10 miles into Crested Butte. Today, it's a mountain bike trail almost all the way, and you can ride your mountain bike on that old wagon road that now is 140 years old. There were two routes that brought people into Crested Butte before the arrival of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad in 1881. One of them came from Gunnison along today's 135, went through Almont, Jack's Cabin, and Glacier, and Sam Fisher had a toll gate at Almont. And Barlow and Sanderson's stage line ran through that area, and a number of other stage lines also did, taking people up into Crested Butte and taking them up into the silver camps. The other route was in through the Ohio Creek Valley. So you came up Ohio Creek, topped out over Ohio Pass at 10,033 feet, and then either ran into Irwin or took the Pioneer Wagon route back into Crested Butte. Crested Butte got its first saloon in 1879. There were 3 pine trees where freight wagons unloaded. One of the trees was cut down and split to make a bar. Freighters pulled a barrel of whiskey off a wagon, and with each man having his own can to drink from, they paid 25 cents a drink. So whoever had that barrel of whiskey probably came out pretty well. The Elk Mountain House on Elk Avenue, which you can see in the photograph, that's right where Donita's was, and unfortunately Donita's just closed last year. The Elk Mountain House was the great hotel of Crested Butte. It was Crested Butte's answer to the famous La Vita Hotel in Gunnison. It was finished late in 1881, but had the grand opening in February of 82. And that grand opening involved 150 guests, a grand ball, and a supper. There were 86 different foods on the menu. It took a year and a half to build that hotel, which was 34 feet by 100 feet and 3 stories high. It had a big stove in the center of the main floor, which heated the halls above by registers. The dining room was 36 by 34 feet. 2 rooms on the 3rd floor made up the bridal chamber. The entire Elk Mountain House had 42 rooms, along with a pool room. It was built for $40,000 by Town Father Howard Smith, and one of the great hotels on the Western Slope. 3 other hotels existed very early in Crested Butte. One of them still stands, and that's the Forest Queen on Elk Avenue. The other 2 were also on Elk Avenue, and that one was called the Crested Butte House. You'll see a picture of that a little later on, and Mrs. John Sanger's house. And all those hotels date back to the early 1880s. Crested Butte got a school also very early. The first one was a frame building above the coke ovens south of town. And of course, with the coke ovens right there, that wasn't a very good location. So that frame building was soon moved north of town, not far from where the Rock Schoolhouse is today. And you can see the Rock Schoolhouse on the screen right now. When that happened, the grade school was in the frame building and the Rock Schoolhouse was for the high school. And the original name of the athletic teams for Crested Butte was the Rangers. It's called the Titans today, but the Rangers back then. By 1916, Crested Butte had the largest school population in the county. Tremendous school population. In 1881, Coal Creek, just above town, was tapped for water, and a reservoir was built on a hill just to the west of town. In 1882, a telephone line connected Crested Butte and Gunnison. 7 years later, in 1889, the Crested Butte Light and Power Company was started and provided direct current electricity to the town. Nobody had any alternating current yet. That would come in Telluride for the first time in the history of the world 2 years later, when they ran alternating current up to the Gold King mine. And that is a great story we'll talk about later, featuring George Westinghouse, Nikola Tesla, Louis Nunn, and Paul Nunn. Louis Barthel was the mail carrier very early in Crested Butte. He carried the mail along a toll road between Crested Butte and Gothic, and that ran right along the East River. And he carried the mail winter and summer. In winter, he carried it on skis. And one interesting story about Louis Barthel. One day, to his chagrin, he had to carry a 5-gallon can of coal oil ordered by a miner in Gothic. When the miner ordered a pair of hip boots on the next trip, Louis Barthel got even by bringing the hip boots into the miner one at a time. Nearby Aspen, Colorado did not get a railroad until late 1887. And Aspen by then was the #1 silver town in the world, not the United States, but in the world. The Smuggler, Turtle Lot Park, the Durant, one great mine after another, the Molly Gibson. And it was a hard job to get ore out and supplies in. So the way they did that from Aspen was load up burros, better known as Rocky Mountain Canaries, because when you overloaded them more than 200 pounds, they would sit down and emit a shrill whistle, which reminded miners of a canary. And 400 to 500 of these were taken in line from Aspen with 200 pounds of ore on their back over 11,800 foot high East Maroon Pass, and then brought into Gothic and ultimately into Crested Butte, where they hit the railhead and the ore was shipped out. And then all of those burros would be loaded up with supplies from Crested Butte and brought back into Aspen. And that occurred until Aspen got a railroad in 1887. A dinner station was built at Copper Lake, just outside of East Maroon Pass, along with stables and a small boarding house. A mail route came when a road was finished, along with a passenger and mail stage line. In the winter, bobsleds were used. Crested Butte at 8 o'clock, Aspen at 4 o'clock. So it took the stage 8 hours to get over East Maroon Pass from Crested Butte into Aspen. Avalanches were very dangerous. In 1885, 6 people were killed near the pass. And the mail carrier, A.C. Adair, was also killed, and his body was not found until the spring. A primitive road was also built over 12,705 foot high Pearl Pass. Brush Creek on one side, Aspen on the other side. However, even though that road was built in 1883, the Crested Butte newspaper said, and I quote, "The last 8 miles into Aspen will require much work, as the builders of the road did not follow the route of the engineers and ran over hills and boulders making it impossible for teams. So Pearl Pass obviously wasn't used very much. One of the interesting tidbits about Crested Butte early was that the main street initially was Maroon Avenue. However, the arrival of the Denver and Rio Grande changed it to Elk Avenue. And on the early maps in the center of town, 4 blocks were laid out in a plaza located in the form of a diamond, in the center of which was a flagstaff. And the plaza was scheduled to have 3 artificial lakes, along with shade trees, evergreens, and shrubbery. If you can imagine that being there today. But obviously that never happened, but Elk Avenue became the major avenue. Fire was always a problem in Crested Butte and in a lot of high mountain towns, high mountain mining towns. And the problem always was that everything was made out of wood. All the buildings were built close together, and there was very little fire protection, especially in the wintertime. In 1890, a fire came with a high wind and burned out 15 buildings along Elk Avenue at a total cost of $50,000. After that, the town put in fire hydrants. But in January of 1893, another fire came on Elk Avenue, and unfortunately, the water was frozen in the fire hydrants, and most of the entire block on Elk Avenue was burned. And the interesting thing about this fire was that with the wind, they were afraid it was going to take out all of Elk Avenue, so the fire department decided to blow up a couple of buildings and create a space, but the fire couldn't jump. But unfortunately, they forgot that there was dynamite and blasting powder in the 2 buildings they blew up. And the ensuing blast took out 4 more buildings, blew a gaping hole in the fire hall, and wiped out, it practically broke every window in town. Another fire came, and this one came in the year 1901. And this fire did $50,000 in damage on Elk Avenue, burned the Colorado Supply Company store and 4 other buildings. Another fire in 1909 destroyed buildings of the CF&I up on the bench where the big mine was located. So fire was always a real problem in these high altitude towns. Crested Butte very early had 2 fantastic proposed railroads in the 1880s. One of them would have connected Crested Butte with Marble. Another one would have connected Crested Butte with Aspen. The one that would have run into Marble was the famous Elk Mountain Railroad. That one would have started at Carbondale on the Roaring Fork, come up the Crystal River to Marble, then up Ewell Creek, then over 12,200 foot high Ewell Pass, and then down the Slate River to Anthracite and the railhead at Crested Butte. The railroad to Aspen would have run either over Pearl Pass or from Almont through Taylor Park, over Taylor Pass at 11,800 feet, down Express Creek, into Ashcroft, and then Aspen. Needless to say, neither one of those railroads was ever built. I mean, tremendous elevation, tremendous avalanches, very scary passes, didn't happen. On November 21, 1881 at 2:30 in the afternoon, the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad arrived in Crested Butte, a red letter day indeed. 2 railroads had jockeyed to become first to come into the booming Gunnison Country. One of them was a narrow gauge railroad of John Evans, and that one was called the Denver, South Park, and Pacific. That one ran from Denver up Turkey Creek Canyon, over Kenosha Pass, through South Park, over Trout Creek Pass, up to the Alpine Tunnel, through the Alpine Tunnel, down to Pitkin, and then ultimately into Gunnison in September of 1882. It was headed for Irwin, but the boom had busted and it never got past Baldwin up Ohio Creek. But you can still see the grade into Irwin today. The other railroad was William Jackson Palmer's Denver and Rio Grande. And Palmer built that railroad from Denver to a city he laid out, Colorado Springs, to Pueblo, through the Arkansas River Canyon and the Royal Gorge, to Salida, over Marshall Pass, down the Tomichi, into Gunnison in August of '81, and then 28-mile branch ran up to Crested Butte and arrived on November the 21st, 1881. And it would stay in Crested Butte until the big coal mine, the big mine on the bench, closed. It carried cattle and passengers, but mostly coal. It was not uncommon to see a narrow gauge Rio Grande engine pulling 100 cars of coal through the East River Valley and then up Tomichi Creek to Sargent's. And at Sargent's, 2 more engines were put on because one couldn't pull that number of cars over Marshall Pass. And that was called a triple header. And then you went over Marshall Pass, and that coal was taken to the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company steel mills in Pueblo. Crested Butte was a town first inhabited by Cousin Jacks. These were people who came out of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. And they had names like Ross and Gardner and McNeil and McCluskey. And they were from the best mines in the world. They were the best miners in the world, and they were here during the silver boom. Out of the 61 miners killed in the Jokerville explosion, which we'll talk about momentarily, every one of them was a Cousin Jack. And they called them Cousin Jacks because if one of their brethren got killed in a mine or was killed in an accident, one of the other people from Northwestern Europe would go up to the foreman and say, "My Cousin Jack can do that." And another guy was hired. Their wives were called Cousin Jennies, and they were tremendous miners. Then in the late 1880s and early 1890s, coming into Crested Butte were people from Italy and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Slovenia, Slovakia, and they had strange sounding names like Sedmak, Sporsic, Saya, Krizmanich, Kapushin, and Mihelic. And there was a big difference. The people from Northwestern Europe spoke the English language and they were Protestant. The people from Southeastern Europe spoke a foreign language. They did not speak English and they were Catholic. And because the Ku Klux Klan was very prominent in Colorado and around the nation at that time, they were considered very suspicious. They had never worked in mines before. They had been farmers in their homeland in Southeastern Europe, but now they began to work in the coal mines. On January the 24th, 1884, at 7:30 in the morning, came the Jokerville explosion. The Jokerville was a bituminous coal mine just a little west of Crested Butte. It opened up in 1881. It had 50 coke ovens. The explosion, caused by seeping methane gas, a colorless gas, killed 61 miners, every one of them a Cousin Jack. Now we're going to talk a lot more about the Jokerville later on in a later talk that I have on coal mining. And you can see a picture of somebody being taken to the Crested Butte Cemetery, and usually the people were put up in a blockhouse and then buried. 46 of those 61 miners were buried in a common grave in the Crested Butte Cemetery. As I said, more about that later. In the early years of Crested Butte, the only way to get around in the winter was by skiing. And hardly anybody knew how to ski initially. But the people who taught everybody else how to ski were people from Canada, like Al Johnson and his brother Fred, or from Norway, where they had skied before in their home country. And they taught everybody else how to ski. The skis were 9 to 14 feet long, handmade, weighed 8 pounds, 4-inch heel block in the back where your heel couldn't go back, but it could come up. Leather toe piece. Put your mining boot in that leather toe piece, and a guide pole. And everybody used the telemark turn if in fact you turned. It wasn't like today. I'd like to see somebody skiing with those long skis today and trying to plant their pole and turn. Very little turning was done. Tour races came in the 1880s, and people from Crystal and Gothic and Gunnison and Crested Butte and Tin Cup would get together on the weekend and have races for big money with a lot of drinking and betting going on. But I won't get into that because I'm going to talk about that later when I give you a lecture on early day skiing. And we'll talk about the tour races, including a fantastic race between Charlie Bainey of Crested Butte and Al Johnson, the champion skier of the Rocky Mountains. If you go to Colorado Ski Museum in Vail, they got a write-up of that. In the summer in Crested Butte, the main sport was baseball. And Crested Butte always had a fine team and usually beat Gunnison in games that featured much betting and drinking by spectators. Crested Butte was very lucky to have a man named Jap Pitzer, P-I-T-T-S-E-R, who later on played in the high minor leagues. And he was a great pitcher, and he was hired by the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company to work in the mines, but I can guarantee you most of the time Jap Pitzer practiced baseball because he could make a lot of money for the people of Crested Butte by pitching against Gunnison. In one game in May of 1886, dogs fighting on the field delayed the game for 20 minutes. And then the game was called because of darkness by the umpire, who the newspaper said, and I'm quoting, was the object of indecent assault from loose tongues during the entire game. As silver faded and finally collapsed with the silver panic of 1893, the silver camps became ghost towns, and Crested Butte now changed from being the jumping off point, the gateway to the Elks, and turned to its destiny, and that was coal. 9 great coal mines surrounded the town. The Peanut and the Pershing along the lower loop, the CF&I Big Mine on the Bench, the great anthracite mine at Floresta, 11 miles to the west, the town of Anthracite, 4 miles north along the Slate River, the Jokerville, and then the Pueblo, Buckley, and Robinson mines just south of town. Crested Butte was known as the Pittsburgh of the West. Horace Tabor, the great mining man from Leadville, came into town as the majority owner of a new bank because of the optimism. One account of Crested Butte during those days declared, quote, "Long banks of coke ovens made the night sky lurid with leaping red flames, and the sickening sweet odor of coal being baked into coke hung heavily over the snow-covered town." In the year 1894, the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company Big Mine opened up on the Bench. It would produce coal for the next 58 years, Colorado's 3rd largest coal mine. It had 7 miles of underground workings. It was a bituminous mine. It employed 400 men and 70 mules, and the Big Mine was the dominant force in Crested Butte for a long time. Below the Big Mine entrance were 154 coke ovens, which produced coking coal essential in the production of steel. In these ovens, bituminous coal was heated red hot to drive out some of the impurities. And then when it cooled, it was called slag and taken to the CF&I steel mills in Pueblo. On the east side of Monarch Pass, the CF&I owned a limestone quarry. It still produces today. And you need lime to produce steel. And that lime was taken by train to Pueblo. And then you got molten iron from the Trinidad area. And the molten iron and the lime and the coking coal came hooked together at Pueblo. Now, where I'm from in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, we got a town called Bessemer. And it was named for Henry Bessemer of England, who in 1856 invented the blast furnace. And you put the coking coal and you put the lime and you put the molten iron in that blast furnace, and you blasted air into it, driving more of the impurities out, the carbon dioxide. Now, it's a little more complicated than that, but that is how you converted iron into steel. And Crested Butte was integral to the Industrial Revolution because the CF&I for a long time was the only steel mill west of the Mississippi River. By the year 1882, Aspen had 1,000 people. In 1890, it had 1,500. The entertainment there, drink beer, dance the polka, religious holidays, and baseball games. The town soon got 3 newspapers. The Crested Butte Republican in 1881 soon changed to the Gazette in 83. And John E. Phillips then moved his Elk Mountain Pilot from Irwin to Crested Butte in 1884. And finally, the Crested Butte Weekly Citizen, started by a controversial woman editor named Sylvia Smith, who later on became famous in Marble. She warred against the CF&I because of their exploitation of the miners. Later on, she was kicked out of Marble and later on sued successfully for $10,000. From 1894 to 1952, when it closed, the big mine on the bench was Crested Butte's largest employer, and as I said, the 3rd largest coal mine in the state. Crested Butte's coal mines produced anthracite, bituminous, and coking coal, and was one of the major coal towns in the West. Then in 1952, because of oil and gas and high transportation costs, the big mine closed, and Crested Butte's population plummeted to 300, and many said it would become a ghost town. In 1955, the Denver and Rio Grande took out the railroad tracks, and the end seemed near for the once great coal town. Homes sold for $500, and Crested Butte a few years later lost its high school. The Keystone Mine, which had produced silver, lead, and zinc as early as 1881, opened again in 1957 and was worked on and off for about 15 years, but never amounted to much. Few knew it at the time, but that mine, located on Mount Emmons, was in the middle of one of the largest and richest molybdenum deposits in the world. In 1958, Dr. Hubert Smith, a medical doctor and lawyer from Texas, started a law science academy in Crested Butte and bought many homes. He hosted summer institutes. Publicity about the scenery and the outdoors publicized Crested Butte. The town was becoming known again. The age of coal gave way to the age of snow in Crested Butte when 2 Kansans, Dick Eflin and Fred Rice, began the Crested Butte ski area during the winter of 1961 and 62. But that's a later story. So here's Crested Butte today. 1,600 residents, thousands of tourists every year, one of the top schools in the nation, fantastic festivals, one of the world's top mountain bike areas, a world-class ski area, and a National Historic Site. Crested Butte, they say, is a state of mind, much more than a place. And I'm going to finish by telling you what Theodora Kreuber, who wrote Ishi about the last surviving Indian in California, but who was raised near Telluride, said about the San Miguel Valley, and I think we all feel the same way about Crested Butte. Talking about it in 1955, she said, "In that thin, dry air, life moved at a pace of almost terrible intensity. There were no neutral moments, the galloping brevity of spring and summer, the long months of winter with the threat of tragedy always hovering near. Colors were high, the reds in the soil, the fall gold of the aspen, the indescribable sky. Riding in summer and tobogganing in winter were fast and dangerous. The heights of the mountains and the depths of the canyons were beyond the human norm. One went about totally sensitized. No wonder recovery for the elders was a trip to the coast, and for a youngster, introversion. Get on your horse and ride until you looked out and down, tremendously out and down. God was a pagan god. in the air, over the mountains, in the waterfalls. But how can I give the feeling tone of my childhood in that high alpine valley, which simply is one of the most beautiful spots in the world? And that, my friends, is Crested Butte, the East River Valley, the Elk Mountains, one of the great spots in the world. Thank you all very much for being on board. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Shelley will take them.
Yes, please add any questions that you have to the chat and I will read them to Duane. Thank you all again for joining. We've had a great turnout tonight. And again, it's going to be every Thursday at 7 o'clock.
Yep, and the next Thursday will be on the Black Canyon, and there will be a lot of exciting things occurred in the canyon, one of the 4 national parks in Colorado.
We're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. I don't see a lot of questions, Duane. I think you covered things very well. Oh, here we go. Here's one from Bobby Martin. Where exactly was the Jokerville mine?
Yeah, the Jokerville mine, if you go out of Crested Butte, just as you come up the hill, as you come out west of town, the vein really connected on to the big mine. So it's right on the left side of the road, about 200 yards up the hill as you go out of Crested Butte to the west. Yeah, I appreciate all the thank yous. And it's great to see a lot of people that I remember from the quote old days. Yeah, we did record this, I think, Shelley, right?
Yes. Yes, we have recorded it and we are going to post it on our website.
Jason Hansen has a question. Yeah, Jason, you know, I never have, but I gave a talk at Vail, not this year, but the year before. And 2 of the top skiers at Vail tried to ski on skis used by the 10th Mountain Ski Division, which were a lot easier than the long ones I'm talking about, and they couldn't stand up. They videoed them and they were falling all over themselves. So it's really difficult.
Ooh, there's a question here from Barbara Mason. When did the railroad loading dock and freight building get raised up as it is in the renovation today?
You have to repeat that again, Shelley.
When did the railroad loading dock and freight building get raised up as it is in the current iteration of the building?
Yeah, you know, Barb, I don't know that. You'll have to talk to the people that did the renovating and the people who owned it right after the Rio Grande left. I can't answer that. I don't know. But it was, you know, the railroad stayed until 52, so shortly after that.
Here's a question.
Somebody wanted to say a word about Gothic. For those of you out of state, Gothic was a great silver camp located 8 miles from Crested Butte. And it's the home of the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory, which is world famous. I'll talk about that when I talk about the silver camps, but that's where they do the pioneering studies on global warming and climate change. And it was started by Dr. John C. Johnson of Western in 1928. And still ongoing today with some of the top scientists in the world coming in every summer.
Thanks, Duane. Here's a question from Phil Bloys. Nicer hotel, La Vida or Elk Mountain House?
You know, the La Vida Hotel was built for $250,000, 4.5 stories high, teak and mahogany, gold lace, Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers. So it was very pretentious, and obviously a little better than the Elk Mountain House. One person who came through said it was a peacock among mud hens.
That's a great description. I see a question here from Mike Burns. What happened to the railroad right of way? Would have been a great rails to Trey's Path.
Yeah, Mike, the answer to that question is the Rio Grande eventually gave up their right of way to the people who own property alongside. And that's unfortunate because if the railroad ran to Crested Butte today, what a tremendous ski train it would be. But trying to buy that right of way would be impossible.
Elva Dreyer's wondering, do you have a list of all your published books posted somewhere?
Elva, I'll tell you, if you just go on Facebook, I'm on Facebook, and then just plug in. Maybe Shelley can do that next time. We'll do that for you next time. But if you guys know how to Google, I don't know how to Google. This guy Harry Google, they used to have a song, and I grew up. We called Barney Google with the googly eyes. So I don't know who this Google guy is, but he knows everything. So if you Google my name, you'll get it. Yeah, most of the books are at a sale at the museum right now. You bet. Shelley, I think that's it.
Great.
We have had, it's wonderful to have everybody aboard. Thank you for all the kind comments. And hopefully I'll see you next Thursday when we talk about the Black Canyon.
Oh, I just put the donation site in. Somebody said plug that donation site. So you'll see it in the chat. And it's www.crestedbuttemuseum.com.
I see Jolynn was on board. Jolynn was the captain of my 1990 women's cross country team, the greatest captain I've ever had for the women, and she now flies big jets. I think it's American Airlines. I hope I'm right. Jolynn, tell me if I'm right. Correct. So congratulations. Thanks, Jolynn.
Yeah, we do have Duane's books for sales at our store. And you're welcome to call us if you'd like to purchase one. You don't have to be in town to buy things from the store. Thank you, Eric, for that recommendation. And we're at 970-349-1880. The year that Crested Butte became a town.
Well, thanks everybody, and thank you for the kind comments, and I'll look forward to another great session on Thursday coming up. Have a happy 4th.
Thanks everyone for joining. See you next week.
Shelley, thanks for